Hook 1. Can a single act of kindness change a life forever? Poor Waitress bought a coffee for a struggling dad and his daughter, not knowing he was a lonely millionaire in disguise. The rain was relentless that morning. Sheets of gray water cascaded down the windows of the Rainy Bean, a tired little cafe tucked in a quiet corner of Seattle. Inside, the warmth of espresso and cinnamon did little to soften the tension behind the counter. "You gave away another muffin this morning, didn't you?" Mr. Olson's voice cracked like thunder. He glared over his glasses, arms crossed. Andrea Brunner, 24, wiped her hands on her apron and met his stare. Her blonde hair was pulled into a low ponytail beneath her beanie, and her cheeks were flushed from the heat of the espresso machine. "He was freezing," she said calmly. "Just a kid. He didn't even ask for anything. This is not a shelter. You want to feed people, do it with your own paycheck." He shook his head and walked away, muttering about profit margins. Andrea sighed, glancing out the window at the rain. Hook 2. What would you do if a stranger's kindness revealed a secret that turned your world upside down? That was when the door creaked open. A man stepped in, rain dripping from his sleeves. His coat was worn thin, frayed at the cuffs and 2 sizes too big. His shoes squeaked with every step. Beside him walked a little girl around 6, with tangled brown curls peeking from her hood. She clutched a ragged pink doll, her small face pale and quiet. They hovered near the counter. The man's eyes darted briefly to the menu. Andrea approached, wiping her hands. "Morning. What can I get you?" He hesitated, reached into his pocket. Fumbled with a few worn bills. His eyes flicked toward the girl, then back at the register. "Just 1 small coffee, please," he said finally, voice low. Andrea glanced between him and the girl. The child stood silently, hugging her doll tighter. Her shoes were soaked through. "1 small coffee," Andrea repeated. "Coming right up." She stepped back, prepared the cup. Then, without a word, she grabbed another, poured a second coffee, reached into the muffin case, and wrapped one up, still warm. When she returned to the counter, she placed 2 coffees and the muffin in front of him. "I think you forgot your second order," she said with a gentle smile. He looked startled. "But I only," she held up a hand. "Rainy day special, on the house." The man's mouth opened, then closed, his eyes softened, moisture rising not from the rain, but from something deeper. He gave a slow nod. "Thank you," he murmured. The girl whispered, "Thank you," and her fingers wrapped around the muffin like it was treasure. They sat in the far booth away from the other customers. Andrea watched as the man unwrapped the muffin and split it evenly in half. 1 for him, 1 for her. The girl smiled for the first time, taking a tiny bite and leaning against his arm. Andrea kept glancing over as she worked. Something about them, silent, connected, tired, tugged at her. When she checked the table half an hour later, they were gone. The cups were empty, napkins folded, the muffin wrapper neatly discarded. But beneath the salt shaker, she found an envelope. She picked it up, frowning. It was thick, too thick for a receipt or thank you note. Inside were 5 crisp $100 bills and a small piece of paper. "You just saved more than a morning." Andrea stood still, her heart thumping. She looked around the cafe, then out into the rainy street. They were nowhere in sight. She folded the note carefully, placing it back in the envelope. Mr. Olson passed behind her again. "Everything all right?" "They paid," Andrea said softly. "In cash," he grunted and kept walking. But Andrea was not thinking about receipts. She was thinking about the quiet man with sad eyes and the girl with the ruined doll. She did not know he was Joseph Bennett, millionaire founder of Bean and Brew, hiding in plain sight. A man who had lost nearly everything except the daughter he now tried to protect while seeking something real. All Andrea knew was that she had given kindness to someone who truly needed it. And something told her that was not the end of it. The morning after the rain, Andrea left her apartment before sunrise. Her small studio above a laundromat smelled faintly of detergent and burnt toast. The heater coughed, but never fully warmed the place. On the kitchen table sat a pill organizer and a medical bill, another reminder of the hospital debt she was slowly chipping away at. Her mother's heart had failed suddenly 3 years ago. The surgeries, medication, and care drained every dollar Andrea had ever saved. She worked double shifts, skipped meals, skipped birthdays. She paid in sweat and silence. But she smiled every day. She smiled because once, when she was 10 years old and hungry, a stranger had bought her lunch. No questions asked, just a warm sandwich and the quiet words. One act of kindness can echo forever. Andrea never forgot. Joseph Bennett had also once believed in echoes, but his were filled with silence now. 5 years ago, he had held his wife's hand for the last time in a hospital room that smelled too clean. Her death shattered everything. Friends offered condolences, then disappeared. Business partners circled like vultures, disguising greed as sympathy. His mother, Eleanor, had not cried at the funeral. She had simply asked when he would remarry. "You need a proper family again," she said, "for Cheryl and for the brand." Brand, that was the word she used for their lives. So, Joseph left. He sold the penthouse, rented a modest car, cut ties with media. He took Cheryl and started driving, not aimlessly, intentionally. They visited small towns, quiet cities. He carried only cash, no phone calls, no interviews. He wanted to see if people would treat him the same without the suits, without the title, without the money. Most days they did not, except for one morning in a rainy cafe in Seattle. After that first visit, Joseph found himself returning to the Rainy Bean. At first, it was for the coffee, then for the warmth, then undeniably for the smile behind the counter. Andrea never asked personal questions. She greeted them like old friends, learned how Cheryl liked her cocoa, 2 marshmallows, no whipped cream, and remembered Joseph preferred his coffee without sugar. Each time they came in, Andrea had a new story to tell Cheryl, a ladybug that landed on her bus ticket, a dream about flying on a spoon. Cheryl would giggle, her doll perched on her lap. Joseph watched, silent. He had not heard his daughter laugh like that in months. Andrea never pressed, but she noticed things. Joseph never took phone calls. He tipped generously, but always discreetly under napkins, inside books. He paid in cash and never gave a last name. And yet, there was gentleness in him, in the way he straightened Cheryl's coat or how his eyes lingered on Andrea's when she smiled at his daughter. One Thursday morning, Cheryl spilled her cocoa on the counter. Andrea laughed and handed her a new napkin, then bent down and whispered something that made the little girl beam. Joseph stood by the window, coffee untouched. He watched as Andrea knelt beside his daughter, wiped her hands gently, and drew a tiny heart in whipped cream atop the new cocoa. Something inside him ached. He remembered the way his wife used to look at Cheryl. He remembered what it felt like to come home to warmth, not silence, to laughter, not the echo of a closing door. Andrea's life was different. Smaller, yes, quieter, maybe, but it pulsed with realness. She read books from the library because she could not afford to buy them. She left quarters on bus seats for strangers. She sang to herself while washing dishes. She had lost things, too. Her father had died in a construction accident when she was just 7. Her mother had worked nights, juggling jobs. Andrea had learned early how to survive. But she never let the struggle harden her. Instead, it made her softer. Joseph found himself staying longer each time, not just to drink coffee, but to watch Andrea move around the cafe with kindness in every gesture. She seemed to carry hope in her apron pockets, like sugar packets she handed out for free. That afternoon, while Cheryl drew at a corner table, Andrea sat beside her, helping color inside the lines. Her laughter rang through the cafe like a song. Joseph sat across the room, unseen, watching them both. Andrea glanced up once, their eyes met. She smiled. He looked down quickly, unsure why his heart felt full and hollow at the same time. For the first time in years, he did not feel invisible. He felt seen, and that, more than money, more than legacy, was what he had been searching for. The rain had paused, but the pavement outside the Rainy Bean was still slick with memory. Inside, the cafe was quieter than usual, the soft hum of conversations mingling with the clatter of ceramic mugs. Andrea wiped down the counter when she spotted them again. Joseph and Cheryl, walking in just past the breakfast rush. Cheryl's face lit up at the sight of Andrea's sketchbook near the register. She clutched her doll and skipped over. Andrea crouched beside her, brushing a strand of damp hair from the little girl's forehead. "Want to draw something special today?" she asked gently. Cheryl nodded. Andrea handed her a pink crayon. Over the next few weeks, they became regulars. Tuesday mornings, Thursday afternoons, always the same booth, the same quiet smiles. Andrea learned that Cheryl loved drawing suns with extra long rays. That Joseph took his coffee black, but always waited until Cheryl had her cocoa first. Andrea never asked where they lived or why they always paid in cash. She simply made space for them. She saved Cheryl's favorite seat, slipped her extra cookies, and when the sidewalk dried, she brought out chalk and let her color the pavement with rainbows. Joseph never asked for favors, never lingered too long, but he always tipped quietly, sometimes with a folded napkin that read, "You make mornings matter." Andrea never mentioned it. She simply smiled back. One Friday, the espresso machine gave out with a sad hiss. Andrea stared at it, heart-dropping. The boiler had been faulty for weeks, and now it was dead. A line had started forming. "I've got it," she muttered, fumbling for the repair hotline. Before she could dial, Joseph stepped forward. "Mind if I take a look? I might know someone." Andrea blinked. "Seriously?" He nodded. "Just a hunch." 15 minutes later, a technician arrived. "Maintenance check, right," he said cheerfully. "All pre-scheduled." Andrea glanced at Joseph. He simply sipped his coffee and shrugged. When the machine roared back to life, the cafe erupted in applause. Cheryl clapped the loudest, running up to hug Joseph's leg. Andrea caught his eye. "You didn't have to," she whispered. He smiled softly. "You didn't have to give us that muffin either." That night, after the cafe closed, Andrea cleaned the corner booth. A folded piece of paper peeked from under Cheryl's seat. It was a drawing, Andrea and Cheryl holding hands outside the rainy bean. Above them, a sun with oversized rays beamed down. In messy block letters, "Ms. Andrea is my friend." Andrea sat down, the drawing trembling in her hands, her throat tightened. She had not realized it, but somewhere between coffee refills and cocoa spills, she had become part of their world. And maybe, just maybe, they had become part of hers. But something lingered, something Andrea could not name. Joseph's jacket was still threadbare, but his shoes were suddenly polished. His hands, though gentle, lacked the calluses of a man used to hard labor. And when he spoke, there was a calmness, a precision, like someone who had spent years being listened to. Andrea shook the thought away. He was kind. That should be enough. Still, she folded the drawing and tucked it into her apron pocket, pressing it close to her chest. It felt like the start of something fragile, real, and just beneath the warmth, a question waited quietly. Who exactly was Joseph? The rain returned on a Thursday, soft and steady, tapping gently on the windows of the rainy bean. Andrea stood behind the counter, humming under her breath, pouring 2 hot cocos. One had 2 marshmallows, just how Cheryl liked it. She had barely set the drinks down when Joseph and Cheryl stepped through the door. Cheryl waved excitedly, holding up a crayon drawing. Andrea smiled and waved back, her heart lighter than it had been in weeks. But beneath her smile, something tugged. That morning, an envelope had arrived in her mailbox. Not bills, something far stranger. A letter from the hospital. Her mother's account had been settled in full. Andrea had stared at the page, stunned. Every debt, every payment, the surgeries, the medication, all gone, paid by an anonymous donor through a health charity. The hospital offered no further details. Andrea had cried silent, grateful tears. Then confusion crept in. She told Joseph the next day. He was watching Cheryl draw when she shared the news. "That's incredible," he said gently, his tone calm. Not surprised, just steady. "My mom cried," Andrea said. "She kept asking who would do something like that." Joseph nodded. "Maybe someone who understands what it feels like to carry too much alone." She smiled faintly. Something in his voice made her chest ache, but the mystery lingered. Then Lisa, a fellow barista, pulled Andrea aside during a quiet shift. "That guy," Lisa whispered, gesturing toward Joseph. "He's wearing a Patek Philippe." Andrea blinked. "A what?" "A super expensive watch. My cousin sells them. That model costs like 50 grand. Andrea laughed uneasily. "No way. Maybe it's a knockoff." Lisa raised an eyebrow. "Or maybe your coffee shop crush is not who you think he is." Andrea looked toward Joseph. He was helping Cheryl stir cocoa, gently tucking her scarf. Same old coat, same quiet smile. But something had shifted. The seed of doubt planted weeks ago began to sprout. Days passed. Andrea kept serving them. Kept smiling. But she watched closer. The way Joseph held himself with grace, with subtle authority. The way he avoided talking about work. The way he never answered phone calls. Until one night, when it all clicked. Andrea stayed late to clean. The cafe was nearly empty. Joseph and Cheryl were still at their booth. Andrea was in the storeroom organizing cups when she heard his voice. Firm, precise, not the soft tone she had come to know. "No, Eleanor, I am not going through with it. Tell Claire's father the deal is off. Bean and Brew will be fine without it." Andrea froze. Bean and Brew. The name rang like thunder. It was one of the largest coffee chains in the country. She had seen articles, interviews, awards. Joseph Bennett, reclusive founder, widower, millionaire. She peeked through the doorway. Joseph stood by the window, phone pressed to his ear, posture calm but commanding. Cheryl doodled beside him, unaware. Andrea's heart pounded. Everything made sense now: the anonymous hospital payment, the espresso machine repairs, the hidden tips, the watch, his gentle generosity, his quiet absences. And yet, he had never told her. That night, Andrea lay awake, staring at the ceiling, confused, angry, moved. Had he lied, or just protected himself? She thought of Cheryl's drawing, "Ms. Andrea is my friend." She had felt something growing between them, real, unspoken. Was it still real if wrapped in secrets? Andrea did not know the answer. The next morning, she greeted them as always, smiling, polite, warm. But when Joseph reached for his coffee, her eyes lingered on his hands. Not rough, not cracked, not hands used to hard labor. He smiled. She smiled back, but it did not reach her eyes. And as Cheryl tugged her sleeve, showing off another crayon picture, Andrea whispered to herself, "Who are you really, Joseph?" The next day, the sky over Seattle turned a cold gray, heavy with unshed rain. Inside the rainy bean, Andrea arrived earlier than usual, her steps slower, heavier. On the counter sat the hospital envelope again. She had brought it from home, her fingers brushing over the bold black letters, "Paid in full." But this time, the donor's name was printed clearly at the bottom. Joseph Bennett. She stared at it for what felt like hours. No note, no apology, just the truth she had never asked for, but had long suspected. She folded the paper and slipped it into an envelope of her own, laid it flat on the counter. Her breath was uneven, her throat tight. Part of her wanted to cry, the other part was too proud. The bell above the cafe door chimed. Joseph and Cheryl walked in hand, as always. Cheryl beamed. Joseph's eyes searched the room, found Andrea, and softened. Andrea didn't smile. He stepped forward. "Morning," he said gently. Andrea said nothing. Instead, she placed the envelope between them on the counter. Her hand didn't shake. "I need to talk," she said quietly, but clearly. Joseph glanced down at the envelope, saw the name on it. The smile left his face. His lips pressed into a thin line. "You paid for my mother's surgery," Andrea said. "Without telling me." He nodded. "I did." "Why?" she asked. "Why go behind my back? Why not say something?" Joseph glanced toward Cheryl, who had wandered toward the chalkboard to draw. His voice lowered. I wanted to help. That's all. Andrea crossed her arms. Help? That's what you call it? Dropping money from the shadows and pretending to be poor. I never pretended, he said, his voice still calm. I just did not correct the assumption. Her eyes flashed. That's the same thing, Joseph. I was trying to live honestly. To be seen without the name, the wealth, just me. Andrea leaned in. You wanted honesty, but built this on lies. You paid for my mom. You fixed the machine. You left hundreds in tips. And you let me believe we were equals. I never meant to make you feel small, he said. I only wanted to return the kindness you gave us. Quietly. But you were never honest with me, she snapped, voice rising. A few heads turned in the cafe. Joseph's jaw tensed. You think it was easy living like this? Trying to figure out who actually sees me. Andrea's hands curled into fists. I saw you, Joseph. I saw you from the first moment you walked in, soaking wet with your daughter. But now I wonder, did you ever really see me? Joseph took a step back, pain flickering across his face. I never wanted this to hurt you. But it did, Andrea whispered. Because you didn't trust me enough to tell the truth. Silence fell between them. Then Cheryl tugged on Andrea's apron, her eyes wide with worry. Miss Andrea, are you mad at Daddy? Andrea looked down, her throat closing. No, sweetie, she said, her voice soft, but breaking. I'm just sad. Joseph reached out. Andrea, she stepped away. Maybe you should go. Cheryl clutched his hand tightly. Please don't leave. Joseph knelt beside her. It's okay, sweetheart, he murmured. Sometimes grown-ups just need a little space. Cheryl looked back at Andrea. Her lower lip trembled. But I drew you something. Andrea turned away quickly, biting her lip to stop from crying. Her chest ached. Joseph stood, his hand on Cheryl's shoulder. We're going, he said quietly. Andrea didn't move, didn't speak. The bell above the door chimed once more, then silence. She fled to the storage room, leaned against a stack of flour bags, pressed her hands to her face. Tears spilled, hot and fast, not just from betrayal, but from something deeper. She had trusted him, grown to care for Cheryl, found something honest in a dishonest world. And now, it felt like a fragile dream slipping through her fingers. In the quiet of the back room, she whispered, How did we get here? Joseph stood in front of the towering glass windows of his penthouse, looking down at the glittering Seattle skyline. Everything around him shimmered with affluence, polished marble floors, designer furniture, curated art. But inside, he felt nothing but emptiness. He had returned to this life, but it no longer felt like home. Behind him, Eleanor's voice cut through the silence. Claire will be here at 7 sharp. Please wear the navy suit. Joseph did not turn around. I am not going. Eleanor stepped closer, her heels clicking on the marble. She is perfect for you. Her father owns the largest logistics firm on the West Coast. This is not about feelings. It is about future legacy. Joseph exhaled slowly. My future is Cheryl. You can have both, she said tightly. Love comes later, stability comes first. He turned. I already tried your version of stability. It cost me my wife. I will not trade my soul again. Eleanor's face hardened. Then do not expect this family to support your foolishness. He walked away without another word. That night, Cheryl coughed until dawn. Fever burned her small frame, and Joseph barely left her side. He pressed cool cloths to her forehead, whispered lullabies his late wife used to sing. In the quiet, her tiny voice rasped, Is Miss Andrea mad at us? Joseph's heart broke. No, sweetheart. She is just sad. Cheryl blinked up at him. I miss her. He kissed her hand. Me, too. Across town, Andrea stared at her laptop in the dim light of her bedroom. Her heart still ached, but something inside her refused to believe Joseph had acted out of arrogance. She typed his full name into the search bar, Joseph Bennett. A cascade of news articles, financial profiles, and charity board mentions flooded the screen. Her eyes scanned each one. A picture of him accepting a community leadership award. Another of him and Cheryl at a food bank in Tacoma. One line stopped her cold. Following the loss of his wife in a tragic accident, Bennett withdrew from public life, but continued quietly funding programs for single mothers and children in need. Andrea leaned back in her chair, her breath caught in her throat. He had not lied to manipulate. He had hidden himself to protect what was left of his heart. She closed the laptop slowly and stepped into the kitchen where her mother sat with a book. Mrs. Daniels looked up, sensing something in Andrea's expression. "Did you ever hear of a Joseph Bennett?" Andrea asked softly. Her mother frowned, then nodded. "He was on the news years ago, lost his wife, set up scholarships." "Why?" Andrea hesitated. "He's Cheryl's dad. He's the one who paid for your surgery." Her mother's eyes widened. "Andrea?" Andrea looked down. "I pushed him away. I thought he was trying to buy me." Mrs. Daniels reached for her daughter's hand. "Sometimes the people who give most quietly are the ones who have lost the most." Andrea said nothing for a long moment. Her mother added, almost absently, "Remember when you were 7? That winter when your father had just passed and we had no heat. A man showed up with groceries and gave me a gift card for a hot meal. I never got his name." Andrea blinked. "I remember the food. I thought you got a bonus." Mrs. Daniels shook her head. "No, it was just kindness from a stranger." Andrea walked to her room and opened her nightstand drawer. Inside lay the drawing Cheryl had given her, a stick figure of Andrea holding hands with a little girl and a tall man. In wobbly handwriting, it said, "Ms. Andrea is my friend." She stared at it, her heart caught between guilt and longing. Had she made a mistake? Had she let her past hurts blind her to something real? The drawing trembled slightly in her hands. A week later, the windows of the rainy bean glowed with soft amber light. A new sign had been added just beneath the chalkboard menu, hand-painted in gentle cursive letters, "Andrea's Corner." Beneath it sat a wooden donation box with a small plaque, "For those who need a hand, just like someone once did for me." The cafe buzzed with quiet excitement. Flyers had gone out announcing a community charity night, free coffee, warm food, and a fundraiser for local shelters. Andrea had no idea who organized it. All she knew was that her name was now etched into the walls of the place she had once just worked in. When she walked in that evening, the lights had already dimmed to a golden hue, and soft music played in the background. Regulars gathered with newcomers, and neighbors stood in line next to strangers. At the back, a small artboard displayed crayon drawings from local kids. One stood out, bright purple, yellow, and red scribbles that formed 3 smiling stick figures under a sun. Beneath it, in wobbly letters, "Ms. Andrea, Daddy, and me." Andrea stared at it for a long time. Then she felt a gentle tap on her shoulder. A staff member handed her a sealed envelope with only her name on the front. Inside, a note written in childish scrawl, "Dear Miss Andrea, I want you and Daddy to smile again. I miss your hugs and muffins. I made a new picture. I hope you come see it. Love, Cheryl." Andrea pressed the letter to her chest, her eyes burning. "Ladies and gentlemen," a voice called out from the front. She turned. Joseph stood near the microphone, wearing a gray sweater and dark jeans. He looked out over the crowd, hands steady, but eyes scanning for her. "I want to thank you all for coming tonight," he began, voice calm and clear. "Tonight is not about me. It is about kindness and about second chances." The crowd quieted. "I came here months ago with my daughter, looking for nothing but a quiet cup of coffee. What I found was something I did not know I was missing. A woman who saw beyond what I looked like, who chose kindness without needing a reason." Andrea stood frozen near the back, her breath held. "I was not honest about who I was," Joseph continued. Not out of malice, but out of fear. I had lost someone I loved, and I stopped believing people could love me for who I am, not for what I own. He took a slow breath. But one act of generosity, 1 cup of coffee and a muffin, shifted something in me. It reminded me that goodness still exists, that love might still exist. Andrea blinked rapidly, her heart thudding in her chest. Joseph looked straight at her now. Andrea, I am sorry for not trusting you with the truth. And I am sorry for walking away before you could truly understand who I am. But Cheryl and I, we miss you more than you know. Silence held for a beat. Then Andrea stepped forward. Without a word, she reached out, took his hand in front of everyone. Joseph's shoulders relaxed, the smallest smile breaking across his face. They stood side by side as the crowd applauded softly, not out of spectacle, but because something real was being mended. Later that night, the three of them passed out meals to people lined up outside. Andrea handed out muffins, Cheryl passed out drawings, and Joseph ladled soup, sleeves rolled up, and hands warm despite the cold air. Someone whispered, "Is that him? The guy from Bean and Brew?" "Yeah," another answered. "But he's here, not in a boardroom." Andrea laughed as Cheryl tugged at her hand and handed her another drawing. This time, 4 figures beneath a tree. "That one's Grandma," Cheryl said proudly. Andrea ruffled her hair. "It's beautiful." Under the soft lights of the rainy bean, Joseph and Andrea shared a look, a quiet, grateful look of people who had been broken, but not beaten. And slowly, their fingers intertwined, not with fanfare, not with promises, just presence, just peace, just the beginning. Months passed. The city bloomed into spring. But for Joseph, Andrea, and Cheryl, the seasons that truly mattered had already changed. Joseph had stepped away from the towering buildings and constant meetings of his former empire. He did not sell his company, but he passed the reins to a trusted partner. He kept just enough to ensure Cheryl's future and let go of the rest. He moved into a modest home near the Rainy Bean, one with creaky floors and a small backyard where Cheryl could plant sunflowers. Andrea helped them settle in, her laughter echoing through rooms that had once felt empty. Together, they launched a small foundation, warm hands, full hearts. The mission was simple: offer assistance to families in crisis, especially those who had fallen through the cracks. It started small, a few grocery cards, rent assistance, school supplies. But word spread. Donations trickled in, and soon their little foundation began to ripple outward. Andrea split her time between the cafe and the foundation office, which was really just a sunny backroom with Cheryl's crayon drawings taped on every wall. Joseph handled the numbers, the logistics. Cheryl, of course, was their official kindness ambassador, often stuffing envelopes with stickers or drawing thank you cards for donors. Their days were simple, uncomplicated, but full. On a crisp evening in May, they strolled through Volunteer Park. The setting sun bathed the trees in golden light, and the air smelled faintly of lilacs. Cheryl darted ahead, her pink sneakers flashing as she chased butterflies. Joseph and Andrea walked side by side, their hands brushed, then held. Andrea glanced over. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked softly. "The boardrooms, the jets." Joseph shook his head. "Not once." She smiled. "Even the private chef?" He chuckled. "You make better grilled cheese anyway." They sat on a bench beneath a blooming cherry tree. Cheryl twirled in circles nearby, arms wide like she was hugging the wind. Andrea watched, her eyes misty. "You know," she said, "when I was a kid, I thought heroes had capes. Now I think they just show up every day." Joseph squeezed her hand. "Like a waitress in a rainstorm." She turned to him, heart full. "Like a dad who gave up everything just to find something real." Their eyes met. Nothing grand. No fireworks. Just truth. Cheryl came running over, out of breath. "Mommy," she cried. Andrea blinked. "What did you just say?" Cheryl paused, wide-eyed. "I mean, Andrea, I'm sorry." Joseph laughed gently. "You can call her whatever you want, sweetheart." Andrea knelt, pulling Cheryl into a hug. "I like Mommy," she whispered. A lot. Cheryl beamed and wrapped her arms around both of them. They stood together, the three of them, as the sun dipped lower and the sky turned soft with twilight. A breeze carried cherry blossoms through the air, scattering petals across the grass. Andrea looked up, her voice quiet but clear. Kindness doesn't need a title, just a heart. Joseph leaned in, kissing her forehead. Cheryl giggled and grabbed both their hands as they walked down the path. Their shadows stretched long behind them. And somewhere in that quiet evening glow, the world felt a little warmer because of one cup of coffee, one act of kindness, and the love that followed. Thank you for listening to this heartwarming journey of love, redemption, and the simple power of kindness on Real Stories Diary. Sometimes, the most extraordinary people are the ones who expect nothing in return. The waitress who offers a warm drink in the rain. The father searching for meaning beyond wealth. And the little girl who reminds us that families are not always born, they are built by love. If this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to Real Stories Diary, where we bring you real, emotional, and unforgettable tales that heal the soul and inspire compassion. Like, comment, and share this story to help us spread the message that kindness, no matter how small, can change a life. We'll see you in the next story. Until then, stay kind and keep believing in the good.